So, herzlich willkommen, meine Damen und Herren, liebe Freunde und Freundinnen des Schweizerischen Architekturmuseums und der Architektur im Allgemeinen. Ich mache den Rest der Einführung jetzt auf Englisch, because this event will be in English. Our two speakers that we have here will present their talks in English. We see already what's the program here. Jeanne Gang will start. Jeanne Gang founded her office in 1997 and meanwhile has a practice of 100 plus employees, and she has become one of the architectural practices in the US that has dealt with issues of sustainability in the most explicit way. There's a couple of architects who try to do that, and she does it in particular. And what is interesting about her work is that she is examining very much the possibilities of architecture to become more sustainable through a very conscious application of materials and construction systems, and she does it also through all kinds of scales. So it started with smaller projects. Most recently she has done a couple of high-rise buildings in different programs. So it's an office that really tries to check all the potentials that architecture has as its command to redesign its relationship with the environment. And the first motive to redesign that relationship is to make less damage, right? We remember the times when architects had the goal to make the world a better place. Didn't start with Michael Jackson, it started earlier. And now I think it seems more and more that there's a certain humbleness among architects, and they say, well, it would be nice to do that, but maybe first we start to make less damage. And I think her architecture is a very spirited excursion into the ways in which that can be done. So I'm looking forward to Jeanne's lecture.
See if I can. Guten Abend. Okay, take that one down. And this one up. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Andreas. I wanted to just talk a little bit about my practice and what drives it. I come from Chicago and this region with these incredible Great Lakes. These are the Great Lakes near Chicago, and they're about 20% of all the fresh water in the whole planet. And so it's an incredible resource. But they are actually, the water is the reason why industry located here. And so only, 100 plus years ago, the city and the lakefront looked something like this, covered with rail lines, when Chicago really became an industrial power. And so being in Chicago, I've seen, these are the kind of things that have influenced me. The Burnham Plan of 1909, it was part of the City Beautiful movement, and it really looked at how could we organize the city to have nature, to have industry, transportation networks, and it laid out this entire plan, and in many ways the city still follows this plan. However, I think what Burnham and Bennett never did was to think about what happens when the industry goes away. And so the reality of today in Chicago, you have a nice downtown, but we have a lot of post-industrial landscapes, wasted lands, and pollution. The hill in the back is actually a landfill, not a hill. There are no hills. But it's really part of this bigger region around these lakes that's known as the Rust Belt. And so this is kind of my muse, if you will, like what do we do with this city next? And this is, of course, plays out in other cities as well. The really interesting thing about the Rust Belt and cities like Chicago on water is that there are these the red titles there, like leftover buildings, lots of leftover materials, but also overlaid with this kind of ecological network, which thrives on, well, even if it's polluted, it thrives on the kind of abandonment. So we have a very biodiverse landscape outside the city. So there's a lot of potential with the leftover materials. In early projects, we looked at recycling these materials into column structures using, a variety of types and figuring out how that could work in a construction sequence. But we also have this issue of the bird migration coming through Chicago and other cities that are on waterways, and the danger of bird collisions with glass, and that's a really big problem in Chicago. Just last week, we had over almost 1,000 deaths of birds that were migrating through the city, and it had to do with the glass on the buildings, but the weather conditions and during migration. So I've been working on that issue for a long time as well. Early ideas about screens and treating the glass. And what I've come to realize is that people are necessary to help. People and architecture is necessary to help the public get engaged with ecology and get engaged with conservation. So a lot of our projects, it's kind of a different tactic that we've been using to move the needle for sustainability. It's activating citizens. This work with bird-safe buildings, the good news is we've had now, I've been involved in writing these guidelines and laws, in fact. We have like 5 cities that have, legal rules about bird-safe buildings, and there's more and more awareness. Not fast enough, but it's something. So I just wanted to show you, like, this impacts all of our projects now, and just one thing that, you learn these things and then you can apply it to almost everything you do, and you just keep adding up and checking off these threats. This is a little theater you can see on Lake Michigan there that we made. It's called the Writers Theater. It's got these 2 theaters inside, and then this big lobby where we wanted to make a civic space for the town so that people could stop in and the architecture can invite people in that are not going to the theater. And so there's this kind of walkabout that's in the canopy level of the trees. This is all a kind of wood construction. And you can see here this idea of the screen and the kind of, this is the frit on the glass that we made in kind of little different creatures. And we employ these things. You can see, maybe you can see there's also frit on this handrail here. So it's like building up these strategies for making buildings better for the environment, safer for the environment, but also just being beautiful buildings that people want to go to. And I think that's a really important point. Getting back to the Chicago polluted area, this is our Chicago River that when I arrived in Chicago, there were still, after I worked actually in Europe for a couple of years, I studied and then worked in Europe and then came back and started my practice. At that time, and they were still dumping untreated raw sewage into the Chicago River. I know Basel has a history with some pollution in the river, and it's a great story to see the turnaround of how people can now swim in the river. That's what my dream is for the Chicago River. It's going to be a while, but so we have these different threats like bad water quality, flooding. This is an invasive species that's making its way up to the Great Lakes through the Mississippi, and then all this post-industrial landscape in the city, which has actually great potential. So this was a research book that was meant to help change that policy so that the city would have to treat, disinfect the sewage before putting it back into the water. So we worked together with NGOs and made this book. which also gave an image of what the river could look like if it became a functioning river. And one of the really interesting things about the book, we had these like 10 steps to get to the clean river. And the step number 1 was really about giving people access to this river. And this is what I wanted to say. I think part of what we have to do is engage with people and get them motivated to be the force. It cannot just be the architect. So a lot of my practice has been like getting people involved with these projects outside of our firm. What we did in the river in Chicago was to, after that book came out, the mayor asked us to build a boathouse. And that's a perfect way to get people using the river, even if it's polluted. And these boathouses were very successful. We did one on the north side, one on the south side, and they really became these gateways to exploring the river ecology. And what was really cool is that after all of this, the city did vote to clean up and to disinfect the water, so the quality also rose. But just giving people this access started to create a whole army of river-loving people, citizens that participate. So this is like 10 years later now. It's a completely different situation, and it's very encouraging. One other little water project as well. I think it really takes this good architecture to kind of bring people to this. We were looking at this urban pond, only about 1 meter deep, so very dirty and not supporting much life. And they asked me to design a pavilion to, put by the pond. But instead of that, we tried to work with the client to design a better pond system. So this is like the depth of it we increased tenfold, and so that fish and animals could winter over, and then changed the edges of it and just turned it into this habitat. And it really did bring, it was like all kinds of animals. This site is within this bigger kind of zoo, but ours is a zoo without cages, and the animals just come. And it's really a habitat that they love. And it spurned on these citizen groups like studying urban wildlife, and there's now a very active group looking at these. These are photos from the nature boardwalk at night, and the night camera we have coyotes and skunks and everything. So people got involved in counting, and these are like eBird stats, and those are from turtles that are banded. So it's really become this kind of outdoor functioning lab. It's a different kind of nature. It looks natural, but it's also engaging with people, and it's really important that they're there. Of course, the gateway drug to conservation is architecture, my view. You have to have something to get people there. So this is a wood pavilion, very simple, small, but it's the draw that brings people to it. And like, it's being used in ways I would have never imagined. It's just a flexible pavilion. Okay, so those are kind of like, this idea of almost like, it's political in terms of change. You have to get people to be your allies. And that's what I think this engagement process does when we work with people. Now I'm going to just switch to a couple projects that have to do with reusing buildings. And I've been thinking about this and working on things like this for a while, but I started to, with my students that I work with once a year, try to get them to look into some of these ancient practices of grafting. Why grafting? Is that the same word in German? Grafting. Grafting? When you horticulturally grafting fruit, fruit onto, think about, this is such a rich metaphor that we can start to mine as architects, because it's like you have this rootstock. Think about the rootstock that's resilient, and it's there, and you start with that. But it's important to add capacity to what we already have. Not just preserve it, but one way to really save carbon is to load up our buildings with more things that they can do. Use them 24/7 and put more uses into them. So this is a book that I have coming out in early next year. It's called The Art of Architectural Grafting, and it kind of mines this technology, very old human and nature technology together, because I really think that humans are important in as well as nature. We have to kind of figure it out together. It's hard to read this graph, but it's really taken from, it's overlapping a lot of data from the EU analysis of where carbon is, how efficient different kinds of renovations are. So the most saving of carbon is kind of like, as you said, Andreas, delay building construction. But you can see that really close next to it, increasing the intensity of use is the second one of saving most carbon. Maximizing reuse. And in 85 is choice of bio-based materials, so it goes on down from there. So one of the things that is not as good, let's say, is designing for disassembly. I think that's because the carbon is not saved until much later, and nature-based solutions is not saving carbon in the immediate future when we really need it. So the grafting is, something that I think can help us think about how to increase capacity of buildings, how to create compatibility, and there's a lot of other things about grafting that can be helpful. Okay, so 3 little projects. One is the Beloit Powerhouse, and this is a project that it's on the Rock River, actually kind of close to where I grew up, and there was a powerhouse there. Looks something like this. But then over the years, it became like it couldn't be cleaned up, so they closed it down. And so I think like this was a great opportunity for a small college in the area, the Beloit College, to reimagine how they could use this powerhouse for their uses. So the college, it actually thought, maybe we can get 3 in 1 for this building: a rec center, a health center, and a student center. And so our project was really about kind of intensifying these programs, adding a field house to one end in the logic of the way this building grew, and really using the position on the river to the maximum amount. These are kind of the interior views. I mean, it was in pretty bad shape, but the thing about these buildings, these post-industrial buildings, it's just perfect, because if you do not renovate this or reuse it in some way, it becomes really a blight. People would have to go way around this building. It was all blocked off. So now it's really engaged with the city, and it acts as a like kind of accessibility machine, because it connects to the higher levels and brings people down to the new river walk. So this is one reuse that I feel like you would never have such a generous building if you started from scratch. So it's such a positive benefit. Here's the bridge that takes people across from the college hill to the entry with an elevator that can bring people down. So it's suddenly like making everything more accessible. There's a running track suspended from this heavy-duty structure inside. There's actually these climbing walls inside the old hoppers, and there's competitive swimming pool inside one end. So that was really a great project for a small school to have such a generous building. These 2 last projects are just a little bit more like the challenges of working in existing buildings. both of these final projects are similar in that they were added onto over time, like in chaotic ways that didn't make any sense. And you can see there's like 8 different additions here. It's an art museum and a school for art. And so sometimes in order to make this function and be maintained instead of losing it and tearing down, even this is not a beautiful building by any means, but could we do something to reactivate it? And that involved taking a few things away. So it's just a sketch, but the green part is a spine that we kind of carved out into the building and revealed the original 1937 building. So the original building becomes the entry, and we offer an additional floor on this side, which is the only structure that could support one more level. So, you know, again, it's like get all the capacity you can out of what you have. And then this cultural, we call it a living room up here, and it goes into the back, which is this is the kind of living room space, social space that they didn't have before, that wraps around the original courtyard, and then the spine, and then it ends up into a restaurant space in the garden. So just this kind of social spaces that make the building function so much better. And then finally, I wanted to talk about the American Museum of Natural History. If you get a chance to go to New York, this was just completed. Again, it's this chaotic. Museums are interesting because they tend to just add and add and add, and they don't really respect their original plan. Here we had many additions. It was really supposed to be a 4-square courtyard building. And then immediately they started to build things in the courtyards and all around. So this museum is very well known. It had a lot of dead ends. And I found it an important project because it is nature, and it's an exhibition about nature, and at a time when we have a crisis in science education, people that don't even acknowledge climate change. And the museum has to kick in to help with this education. And so one of the problems is the old way of exhibiting nature was really putting a separation between us and nature, like objectifying it. And so our hopes for this building were to make it more like a place that you would want to discover nature and be encouraged to partake in science careers, science education for all ages. So this is the kind of grafted area here. What we did was connect in over 30 different places to the existing building. So it really helps the whole building make sense. And it's built on the existing foundations. So it's and kind of, you know, it's a little bit, the original building was supposed to be this big square, but over time, the park kind of started taking over, and people really didn't want to lose any trees. And so that's the reason why this building is, in a way, an organic response to the trees that were there, the foundations that were already there. So this idea of it is really to make a landscape almost like a discovery space. So we designed this porous structure that is a structure made out of like a reinforced shotcrete material, but it only lands on these few feet here. So it's really arching and connecting and opening to the different parts of the museum. You would never see that thing on its own. It's really the structure to get you into the building, and it holds up all the floors of this new wing. And so it was inspired a lot by landscapes that have been worn down by water and wind. Part of the fun thing was going out west to really study geometry of geology, and then in digital ways, but also in very analog ways, understanding how these erosions happen, and then figuring out different ways to model this kind of structure. And to do this without formwork, so you don't have all the waste of formwork, and to do it without finishes is a huge savings. Even though the structure is concrete and it had to be concrete to be, fire rated, but without layers and layers of drywall and without any formwork wasted. So you design the rebar inside, and then teams go through and spray this into the form, and it becomes structural. So it starts at, you put in, it's an incredible process. We found this process in looking at tunnels that were built underneath Manhattan. And it's a typical way of building train tunnels. But we refined it to this level of architecture. And it really does open up to the park much more. This is the first time the building's really connected to the outdoors and has daylit space. And also at the same time reveal a lot of their storage collections that were hidden away in some of these additions, and kind of strip down the walls of some of the existing buildings to reveal those things. Those columns, like I said, the columns had to go down because the entire ground underneath basement area is all the loading for the entire museum. So we couldn't, we just had to put columns where they had to be. And so we tried to work with these constraints and these contingencies. And I think that's why it has a kind of this very organic feeling to it as well. But they have great exhibits. The first time that they really can show their insects. They have some live exhibits of ants that are showing, these leafcutter ants that are so charming, and they inspire me because they work together to do what they got to do, and that's what we need to do. So this was a rendering, and the final building from the outside, it's the same material as the existing building on its opposite axis. So this is the 79th Street axis that I have not found another building in New York that is opens to an axis. So this is like one where you can really go in there and experience what Neil deGrasse Tyson calls Manhattanhenge. It's like this alignment with celestial alignment that happens in a weird time because it's like the grid is shifted in Manhattan. So I think what I'm most proud of, I guess, of this building is it really connects people to the collections, each other. There's classrooms for education, but also to the park and then to the city at large and even the planetary scale. So it's really about connecting people to place. So my office it's like we're about 150 people, and we set it up so that it's really about, it's kind of like a tree. It's not a pyramid. I'm not the pyramid top. I'm more like at the bottom. And it's really grows out, so the values are the roots, and we share values, and then each of the people can be a branch and support other people, and then new people come in, and it's like light, and they're important to bring light to the whole organization. So it's a model, and it's a journey, but I think my main point, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me again, and these are our 4 locations now, and to invite us to talk about hopefully some idea about stewardship and the political side, I think, of this kind of work. Thank you very much.